The Civil War pitted Americans against each other as North fought against South, the Union versus the Confederacy. Some families were even divided as brother fought against brother. It's no wonder that this became by far the bloodiest war in American history. But what happened that caused the country to split apart and draw rifles upon each other? Well, that's the treasure we're out to discover. I'm Dan Luer, and this is History for Little Humans. So before we get going, I just want to let teachers and homeschool parents know that I have lesson plans and resources that go with this video, and there's direct links below, or you can just go to my website, historyforhumans.com, and pick those up. But let's get into it. Our exploration question for today's episode is, what were the major events that led the nation to split and then fight in the Civil War? So keep your mind focused on the events and the changes that caused this separation. Let's start in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's famous words defined America as a nation where all men are created equal. But it also practiced the exact opposite, slavery. So that's why after the Revolutionary War, all the northern states freed their slaves. However, the South that relied much more heavily on slavery for their economy did not. And though they differed on the issue of slavery, the North was willing to accept Southern states having slaves if it meant keeping the country together. But throughout the 1800s, more and more Northerners were growing hostile towards slavery, while at the same time, cotton was becoming more and more profitable. So Southern states became even more dependent on the institution of slavery. Then, in 1852, a book, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, exposed the evils of slavery in a new way. It revealed not only the abuse enslaved workers faced, but what was more shocking to many in the North was the terrible practice of breaking families apart. How husbands could be torn away from their wives or children sold off from their parents. The book flew off the shelves. It was the bestseller of its time by far, like Harry Potter, except Voldemort was slavery. I still own a copy today that sits right on my bookshelf. But as you can imagine, the South felt very differently about the book. Indeed, they hated it. In fact, years later, President Lincoln might have said when he met Harriet Beecher Stowe, "So this is the little woman who started this great big war." He, of course, was exaggerating because there were definitely other causes as well. In the 1800s, there was an equal number of slave and free states. However, as the nation marched into Western territories, every new state threatened to divide the nation as the balance could be disrupted. One key event was the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This act allowed the people in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to vote if they would become free or slave states. And this angered many in the North because previously it had been agreed that all of this land was supposed to prohibit slavery. So Northerners and Southerners rushed into Kansas to try to win the vote. And in 1855, a mini civil war broke out between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces. 55 people were killed, and it became known as Bleeding Kansas. It was a grim foreshadowing of the Great War to come. And what's even crazier is that it led to violence right in the halls of Congress. When Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts delivered a speech critical of slavery, a Southern Congressman, Preston Brooks, used his cane to beat him nearly to death, shattering Brooks' skull and his cane in the process. Tensions were reaching a breaking point. But that brings us to our quiz flash from the past. What happened to Preston Brooks after beating Sumner nearly to death? A. He was arrested. B. He was shot in a duel with Aaron Burr. C. He was voted out of office. Or D. Southerners sent Brooks replacement canes as rewards. Did you guess D? Then you're right. Brooks was actually celebrated by many in the South for beating Sumner. Crazy, huh? I mean, can you believe it? Get it? Can you believe it? And the hatred that many Northerners felt towards the Kansas-Nebraska Act led to the formation of the Republican Party. This new party stood against any future spread of slavery into new lands. And that is why many Southerners were worried when the Republicans selected a tall, gangly lawyer from Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, to run for president. Lincoln saw slavery as a moral evil that was splitting the nation apart. He famously stated, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." And in 1860, when he was elected president, the House finally fell. South Carolina was the first state to secede. They felt they had a right to leave the country because the federal government was, according to them, abusing their power and was going to intervene in their right to own slaves. Also looking to protect slavery, 6 more southern states joined South Carolina and seceded as well. These 7 states then formed a new nation, the Confederate States of America. They hoped that they could just be left alone, but President Lincoln could not let that happen, and he tried to convince them to rejoin the Union. The Confederates, though, were looking forward to a future without the North, and they quickly took over all the federal property in their states. Only one federal military fort remained on a small island off the coast of South Carolina called Fort Sumter. So when President Lincoln sent down supplies to the fort, a South Carolina militia bombarded and attacked it, and the Union men inside fired back. After a 34-hour battle, Union forces surrendered. The Civil War had begun. Although the election of Abraham Lincoln was the spark that led to secession and Civil War, it was a long road, decades in the making. After many compromises over the slave issue, it finally reached a tipping point. The Union was now split and was about to fight for its very survival, which will be the focus of our next episode, so check that out. But remember that history is the light that guides us forward. So what lessons could we learn from this one? Think about it. This has been History for Little Humans. And before you go, if you could just click the thumb that looks like this, it's like right down there, and then you can hit the subscribe button as well and get updates when we drop new episodes every week. Take care.